when sex semen came out in 2006, it was kind of strongly recommended only for non-lactating heifers, only bred to estrus because it was a new product. They wanted it to succeed. And the real increase in conception rates in our lactating dairy cows happened around 2015. And if you look at the graphs and just look at the increased use of sex semen starting in 2015 and then beef on dairy, because what happened in the dairy industry is we overproduced females.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. I'm Travis Mullenix, and today we're excited about having Dr. Paul Fricke, who is a professor in dairy science, a reproductive physiologist in dairy science, but he did grow up in the beef state of Nebraska. And so, but we're really excited about the conversation we're going to have about beef on dairy and you know, where it came from, why it's getting so popular and really a hot topic right now. So welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Travis. Pleasure to be on.
So Paul, just to give the audience a background of who you are and what you do, is just trying to give that overview of your area expertise, et cetera.
Sure. Well, I'll start at the beginning. My credentials, I have an extension appointment here at Wisconsin, dairy cattle reproduction. The best thing I can tell my audience is that I grew up on a dairy farm. So I grew up on a dairy farm in eastern Nebraska. My dad's still farming. He farmed with my grandpa and my uncle. My grandpa's long passed away. My uncle is getting too old to farm. My dad's 83 and still going at it. So corn and soybeans now. But we milked about 60 Holstein cows when I was growing up. Went to the University of Nebraska for my undergrad and got seduced by the reproductive biologist there, Jim Kinder. And he sent me towards grad school. Went to North Dakota State for my graduate work, another good beef state. And worked with a couple guys there that were pretty basic reproductive biologists. And when I finished my PhD in 95, doing a postdoc was the thing that everybody was doing. And I said, okay, well, I'll do a postdoc. But I wanted to get back towards dairy because of my background. And so I came to Wisconsin in October of 1995 to work with Dr. Milo Wiltbank and Ollie Ginther. And when I came to Wisconsin, I told my wife, look, I've got 2 years of funding. Do not like Madison too much. It ends up the position I have now opened up while I was there, and I was able to land that position. So we've been here for 30 years. So it's been a great time here in Wisconsin, and no better place to do dairy than in the great dairy state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's definitely a big dairy state, and separate from a lot of animal science programs, you still have a department in dairy science.
We merged, actually, Travis. That was in 2020. Yeah, there's always pressure from above, so we still have it's just one department now. But we have some beef here. We have some beef here in Wisconsin. There's a lot of smaller kind of cow-calf operations that are here. So you see that in the southern and western part of the state.
But definitely a big ag state altogether, whether or not it's dairy, it's beef, a lot of cropping, etc. So today we're going to talk about beef on dairy and this great expansion of using beef semen in dairy cows has really exploded in the last few years. And so it's really a hot topic.
Very hot topic. And I think one of the things that we talked about before we started recording here is I hear a lot of people talking about beef on dairy. There's some really good work on the muscle biology side and these other kinds of things. I don't think I ever hear anybody talking about why. I mean, why is it that all of a sudden we had this explosion of beef on dairy? So I just want to start with that. And if you look at, I put together a few graphs just to look at the data. AgSource is a DHIA testing center here in Wisconsin and does a lot of stuff in the upper Midwest. If you look at we just put together a stacked bar graph. So beef's sex semen has been around since about 2006. But when sex semen, so I'll start here. I'm a reproductive biologist, so I work with dairy cattle. Dairy cows used to be considered the most infertile of the domestic livestock species. And if you look at, for example, a graph of days open, the long-term trend was for an increase in days open or a decrease in reproductive efficiency up until about the year 2000. And then there was this shift. And what happened is so the reason that the world changed in dairy cattle reproduction is because the guy that I went to do my postdoc with, Milo Wiltbank, developed the OVSync protocol. And that's a hormonal synchronization protocol where we could put semen into cows. And then over about the next 20-year period of time, we developed that into what we call fertility programs. So we can, when we have these more complex synchronization protocols, some people might have heard of them on the beef side. The double OVSync protocol is kind of the most famous one in dairy. That actually increases conception rates in dairy cows by about 10%. And then what happened is, as we got cows pregnant faster, we got our herds into what we call the high fertility cycle, which meant that you could get cows pregnant quickly at the end of the voluntary waiting period. And these lactating dairy cows didn't get fat because they had long lactations and then crash metabolically after they calved. So those are two, I call it a reproduction revolution. And we saw conception rates 20 years ago in the mid 30% range, 30 to 40% in our lactating dairy cows. As a result, the last time I looked at it, we're pushing 50% conception rates. And so when sex semen came out in 2006, it was kind of strongly recommended only for non-lactating heifers, only bred to estrus because it was a new product. They wanted it to succeed. And the real increase in conception rates in our lactating dairy cows happened around 2015. And if you look at the graphs and just look at the increased use of sex semen starting in 2015 and then beef on dairy, because what happened in the dairy industry is we overproduced females. So it used to be that your herd turnover rate was dependent upon the number of females that you could produce. And without sex semen, of course, you're at about a 50-50 female to male ratio. And because repro wasn't very good, we didn't have a lot of replacements. And so replacements were quite expensive. And our herd turnover rates were probably in the 30 to 40% range. And then all of a sudden, fertility goes up, we overproduce heifers. So replacement heifer prices crashed. And all of a sudden, people said, well, we don't need all these heifers. And that's where the beef on dairy really started to come in. So it's a reflection of, well, and then the other thing that happened, of course, on the beef side, we ran into the beef supply problem with the drought, the crash in the beef. We're at all-time lows now with the beef cattle inventory. Prices go up. So our dairy guys can get, I was just giving a talk Friday up in Green Bay. They're talking $850 for a day-old beef on dairy crossbred calf. And so we are just literally, the dairy industry is stuffing beef semen into these cows because milk prices might not be that great, but they're going to take $850 for a calf on the, 1-day-old calf on the ground. There's just no risk with that. So we've just seen this explosion of the use of sex semen and then the use of beef semen in the dairy industry.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think maybe the Wolves family were one of the first to really try or move into this, but they own both sides of that, of a dairy operation, and then
over in Minnesota, you're saying?
Yep, in Minnesota, and they had their ranch and a feedlot, and so
yep,
they were one of the first to grasp on this idea of beef semen in dairy cows, especially in low productivity dairy cows that they didn't want replacement heifers out of. But we've seen, like you say, $850, $1,000 for calf. Day-old calf is outrageous. And think about where we're at in the beef inventory of being so low. It's hard for me to sit here and pencil out buying a calf a day old at $850.
Yeah, how do you make money doing that?
Yeah, so that's that's really interesting where we're at with this. So how is on the dairy side? How are these producers selecting some of these beef semen bulls? What kind of criteria are they looking for?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. What I saw immediately when this shift took place, it was a whipsaw, right? And so this change happened very quickly. And then, because of certified Angus beef, they wanted anything with a black hide. And so people were dredging out any semen that they could find from anywhere that was black hided. And I think there was an initial idea that the beef semen was not as fertile, say, as the dairy semen was. I mean, we've been selecting dairy bulls for all kinds of criteria and fertility and those things for a long time. I think it was more of a reflection of the industry just getting caught flat-footed with not enough beef semen. And I will give it to the AI companies. They responded very quickly for that demand. And now they're testing these bulls. And in fact, if you heard in Nebraska, where I'm from, out in the southwest corner of the state, there's a 150,000 head beef on dairy feedlot going up out there. Have you heard about that? And I think they're just populating it now. And I think their plan is to do a lot of genomic testing to really see, because I think we're a little behind the game on testing these bulls. I mean, the thing that I would say, I think the tension between the dairy and the beef guys is that, the dairy guys want the big value for the calf. Are they necessarily getting paid for carcass merit and growth and maternal ability and all these other things that we can select for? The answer to that is probably no, but indirectly they are, because if the dairy guys don't produce the kind of beef cattle that the feedlots want, they're gonna be in trouble. And so I think it's a slow kind of coming together of those two kind of systems that have been very separate, right? And I've got a little statistic here. I pulled this out of course, the dairy lay press magazines have been running these things like crazy. So here's a quote from Horde's Dairyman back in April 15th, 2024. Of the 9.4 million units of beef semen sold domestically in 2023, 7.9 million units were used in dairy herds. That's from the National Association of Animal Breeders. And I've heard the forecast for that 7.9 number in 2024 to be 10 million probably. Beef used in the beef industry, beef semen in the beef industry has actually come down about 1.4 million units. And I think that's a reflection of the decreased inventories, right? So, and we did a study, we did a big look at a big data set with about 8 million breedings. We saw increases. I think we're getting kind of to a steady state. There's simply not much more these guys can put beef semen into dairy, because what they've done, remember, so initially we overproduced heifers, we overproduced replacement heifers. So heifer prices crashed. Heifers were worth about half of what it cost to raise them. Then people talked about, okay, we're going to right size our herd inventories by using beef semen, and then we're going to use sex semen on the best ones to just get our replacements. And now, because this beef value is so high, we put so much beef into the dairy, we've restricted the heifer population again. So we're at I think 50-year lows. I've got another graph here I could look at. 2025, yeah, we're at 50-year lows in the Holstein replacement heifer market, and I've heard $4,000 for a springing heifer, and so it's restricting the ability of herds that want to expand to do so, and I think it's putting some upward pressure on milk prices. And so at some point, I asked the group that I was speaking to up in Green Bay, a group of dairy farmers, okay, so would you rather take the $850 for the day-old beef crossbred calf, or would you rather sell a $4,000 springing heifer? And they thought about that for a few minutes and kind of, well, the $850 on day one is a very low risk kind of thing, right? So I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. And the question I would have for you, Travis, is I think the speculation on the dairy side, how long are these beef prices are going to hold up? I mean, what is the forecast that you've heard on that?
There has been a little softening in the market here in the last couple months, but it looks like it may hold up because the inventory is so low, and beef producers are not rebuilding the herds.
Okay. They just got out and are not getting back in?
Some got out, some with drought are just, the numbers are low. They're not rebuilding their cow herds. Heifer replacements or placements in the feedlot are staying high. And so there's some data that's come out saying it may be in 2 years from now will we see actually rebuilding of the U.S. cow herd. And some of that is, look at our prices. Our price is so high. A lot of guys do not want to retain that heifer. And very similar to what you were talking about is that $850 or $850 calf versus, raising heifers and selling a $4,000 heifer. And so I think, we'll see what happens, but in the next couple of years, we'll start seeing a rebuilding, and you may see that price structure change a little bit in the next year or two.
Yeah. And I want to go back to your question. It's a really good one about what are the dairy guys looking for as far as the beef semen. In this study that we did, it's 8.2 million insemination records from over 3 million Holstein females and over 9,000 herds in the U.S. This was from Dairy Records Management Services. We were able to see what beef sires were being used at the time. It was 55% Angus on Holstein, 14% Limousin, 12% Simmental, 11% crossbred, which I think is probably a Limflex type of a bull.
Right.
And then and about 2% would be the Japanese Kobe beef. And
interesting.
Yeah, so that's kind of I was on a calf ranch in Idaho, and they had 50,000 crossbred, beef on dairy calves there. A big chunk of those are the Wagyu Holstein crosses, and those are going to high-end restaurants like on the East Coast and stuff. So there's a market for that. And as we talked before, I think that historically about 20% of the beef supply in the U.S. has been from the dairy industry. That tended to be from steers, Holstein steers, and from kind of cutter canner level beef from the old dairy cows. And so I don't know as that's really changed that much that it's 20%. I think what's changed is the kind of beef. It's more the higher end cuts. And so if you look at the stuff that's coming out of Texas A&M, Dale Warner and his group, I grew up on a dairy farm, and I ate Holstein beef my whole life. It's pretty good beef. It's just not very efficient to raise those Holsteins. But when you cross a Holstein with an Angus, you get a pretty decent sized cut that looks good. And they grade prime. They're paying high dollar for prime. And if you get a black hided animal, it's going to go for certified Angus beef. And so it's good beef. I think the one thing they struggle with is the discoloring, the oxygenation of the beef, where it kind of turns brown. It happens a little faster in the crossbred than it does, but it's really good beef. And so now that's the Holstein. The other thing that I'll mention that I kind of want to get into here a little bit, the Jersey folks are in a little bit of trouble. We've always thought of the Jersey as a highly competitive breed to the Holstein. I would say, this is just off the top of my head. We're 80 or 85% Holsteins in the dairy industry. The second breed would be Jerseys, and then the rest of the breeds are hardly anything. But Jerseys have higher fat content and a little higher protein content than the Holstein, but they give a lot less milk. And so there was an interesting study out of Michigan State asking the question, what's more profitable, milking Holsteins or Jerseys? Another thing that the beef folks might not be aware of, you always thought about the Holstein as 3.4% fat in the milk. Our herds now are at 4.5%. And so there's some genetic improvement that's happened, but there's some nutritional strategies that have increased it. Hands down, the Holstein is more profitable than a Jersey if you're selling components, right? And so it's left the Jersey guys and then the Jersey bull calf is worth almost nothing because they're like little brown Wagyu. They just don't do well in the feedlot. They're highly inefficient. I've heard it's good beef. I've never eaten it, but so it's not a very competitive breed. And so these guys are looking for ways. They're using a ton of sex semen to avoid the bull, but nobody wants all those replacement females either. So we did an experiment. There's a group that is making they're making IVP Angus embryos. So this would be Simplot out in Idaho, and they'll sell those embryos for around $50. They're frozen, grade 1, stage 7 IVP embryos. They'll sell those to the dairy industry. And we did a study. I had a master's student did a study just a few years ago, worked with a Jersey herd. And that's kind of where I see that niche is putting those Angus embryos in there. Now, we only put the embryos into the multi-parous cows. We didn't want to deal with big calves in the heifers.
Yeah,
but
right.
IVP, I think in the beef and the dairy industry, there's a ton of interest in this, but there's problems, and there's higher rates of pregnancy loss with these IVP embryos. The pregnancies per UT might not be that good, but even so, when you have an Angus calf now that's worth $850, these guys want to do this. And so it's another thing that your audience might find interesting, that that's something that some of the dairy guys, especially the Angus or the Jersey folks, are putting these Angus embryos in. And it's another stream of beef calves that are flowing into the beef market.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up jerseys, because here in Oregon, we have a high percentage of jerseys or Jersey cross, right? So a lot of grazing, but those calves are not worth a lot. And even our feedlots are blood testing to make sure no jerseys are coming into feedlots, because, they're fairly feed efficient, but they just don't eat and they don't grow. And so they're in the feedlot for a long period of time. They just don't grow, and they do, have a pretty good carcass to them, but it takes forever. And they have some health issues. I think they're probably a little more fragile than a Holstein is. And so that's a massive issue for Oregon, is all these Jersey cows. And what do you do with this beef on dairy with jerseys? So the IVP and I'm sending our dairy manager in the next couple of weeks. She's actually going to Simplot.
It's a great company. It's an interesting guy. I know the guys there really well, and they, initially they were looking at these IVP embryos to use beef because there wasn't enough dairy heifers. Their initial thought was we'll create IVP dairy embryos and use beef surrogates as the mothers, so then we'd have extra replacements. But then everything shifted, as I described earlier, and so they went after the it's kind of a commercial Angus type of thing. It's a black cow, brood cow that's coming through the slaughterhouse. They collect the ovaries right there at the plant. They have an IVF lab, and they use one of three Cavingese Angus sires and to create these embryos. And so it's a neat idea, and it's I just think we have some work to do with regard to getting those IVP embryos to work well and compete. Semen is so cheap. I mean, that's the problem. Semen is very cheap. Embryos are relatively expensive. So we get into those discussions.
Yeah, and I can see in some of these instances, like with the jerseys in, that you may be getting $300 per calf versus the $850. That's a huge difference where you can make that up with IVP, even if there's a loss there. On the Holstein side, are producers going that way? Because I don't see, because these beef on dairy with Holsteins, I mean, they're feeding like Angus cow or calves. They're finishing like Angus calves. And so I don't see the benefit with the IVP in the Holstein side.
I agree with you. And that's why we worked with jerseys with that study. I think, again, the value of that beef, that Holstein Angus cross, is very high. So yet there's a lot of embryo work being done in Wisconsin. We have a lot of the AI companies that are AI, artificial insemination, not artificial intelligence. I always have to clarify myself. The AI companies, we have a lot of them here, and they're paying farmers to put those embryos in because they're trying to generate the next round of bulls. So you got a lot of that going on. There's a lot of people dabbling with that, but it's hard to pencil out on the side of the Holstein when you got the value of that calf like that.
It's true. So to wrap us up, is there anything that you want to touch on that we didn't discuss yet?
Yeah, I would say, your audience out there, I'm a reproductive biologist. I work with a lot of synchronization programs. There's a lot of those programs in beef. And they're different. I always like to say that, a dairy cow is not a beef cow. They present very different challenges physiologically for reproduction. And so the protocols that you're going to be using in the beef side are going to be quite different than what we use on the dairy side. We've done work in heifers as well as cows, basically pairing up these synchronization technologies with sex semen to improve fertility and those kinds of things. Pretty exciting stuff, and as we've seen the increase in use of sex semen. So, yeah, that's kind of a big part of a couple of my grad students what they're working on right now.
Definitely needed in the industry.
It's time for our famous three.
Give your cattle platinum protection with Virvac's new Bovigen Platinum vaccines. These 4 vaccines deliver quality protection against respiratory and reproductive diseases in the vaccine combinations you need to protect cattle at every life stage. Bovagen Platinum vaccines are comprehensive and safe, have consistent supply made in the United States, and are backed by a 6-month guarantee in the Bovagen Platinum Protection Program. Start your platinum protection at us.virbac.com/platinum protection or contact your Virbac representative.
And so, Paul, 3 last questions here, and we'll get done. Is what is your go-to highly recommended beef or dairy, in this instance, resource that you highly recommend someone utilizing?
I'm going to give you 2 sites, 2 websites. There's a beef one and a dairy one. On the dairy side, there's the Dairy Reproduction Council. So if you can't put in DCRC into Google, you have to spell it out, Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council. You're going to find a lot of great information if you want to see what we're doing with reproduction on dairy, a lot of resources there. There's a companion site on the beef side. It's called the Beef Reproductive Task Force. And that's a great website. If you Google Beef Reproduction Task Force, in fact, they've got a webinar series that they do, really good stuff. And there's reviews of all the protocols and all those sorts of things. So in the world of reproduction, those 2 sites on the beef side and on the dairy side are really great places to go for information.
Yeah, great resources. So what is a non-ag book that you highly recommend someone reading?
So I've got 2. Is that okay?
That's okay. Go for it.
Yeah, when you get tenure here at the University of Wisconsin, you can donate a book to the libraries in your name.
Okay.
I haven't gone to check and see if it's actually there, but I'm a physiologist. There's a great book that I picked up. It's called The Knife Man: Blood, Body Snatching, and the Birth of Modern Surgery. It's by Wendy Moore. And it's about this guy and his brother, and he was his name was John Hunter, and he was an early anatomist. So he named most of like the teeth, all the names for the teeth. He did that back in the 1700s. And he was an early reproductive biologist as well. But Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He would exhume these bodies after criminals were executed and dissect them and look at it. So it's really neat. And I've seen actually some of his drawings when we were over in England. And so I have a number of connections to that, being a physiologist. The other book that I highly recommend, and I just gave a talk up at the Western Canadian Dairy Conference, is called The Drunkard's Walk: How Randomness Rules Our Lives. It's by a guy, he's a PhD, I think he's a physicist. His name is Leonard Mlodinow. It was a New York Times bestseller. And he goes through all these things that are random. So he makes the argument, for example, these hedge fund managers that make it big, everybody thinks, oh, they're brilliant, that's why they make it big. He makes the argument, no, it's probably random chance as much as anything. Weather forecasting and all these things. And I read his book, and it ends up that dairy cattle reproduction is quite random. You know, it's kind of like when you breed a cow, it's a flip of the coin. And so I kind of adapted a lot of his ideas into a really fun talk. So those would be 2 books that I would recommend.
And lastly, what sets apart a successful beef or dairy professional from someone that isn't?
This is a great question, and it's a question I get asked on occasion. Agriculture is extremely competitive, and we had some hard times in the dairy industry back in 2008. The dairies that survived, the one thing I think they have in common, they have a relentless desire to get better. They're never satisfied with the status quo. So when I go work with these dairies, they will say things to me like, whatever you do, don't tell me everything's okay. I didn't bring you here to tell me things were fine. I brought you here to tell me how to get better. And so they're constantly learning how to make their operation better. And that's how, it's a very competitive industry, and the way the agriculture works, your biggest competitor is probably your neighbor right down the road. And so if you can do it better, you can do it more efficiently, you can do it cheaper. That's going to be the thing. And that the top notch, I would say, on both the beef and the dairy side, these are the people that are just relentlessly trying to get their operations better.
Definitely needed in a evolving world that we live in, with increased cost, increased, whatever, that producers need to always be looking how to adapt, evolve, and get better.
Yep.
All right. Well, Paul, thank you for jumping on. Great to discuss some of this beef on dairies and how it kind of exploded and the benefits and future of it.
You bet, Travis. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.